She was 6 feet 2 inches tall. 3 men had her tied to a tree in the Montana wilderness. They wanted her to sign papers transferring land worth $50,000 to a husband she'd never met, a husband who didn't even know she existed. When the bullwhip rose, a gunshot cracked through the forest. A stranger stepped out of the shadows, 6 feet 4, eyes like river ice. He looked at her for 1 second, then said 4 words that would change everything. "Can you walk?" She couldn't, so he carried her into the darkness. And that's when she learned the truth. Someone had set a trap. For her. For him. Maybe for both of them. This is the story of how a giant ex-nun and a broken mountain man fought an empire, exposed a conspiracy, and built a love that would last 30 years. But it started 3 minutes before she was supposed to die. She had 3 minutes to live. The rope cut deep into her wrists, sawing through skin with every breath. Blood trickled down her forearms in thin red lines, freezing before it reached her elbows. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. 3 men stood in a semicircle 10 feet away, their faces lit orange by a guttering campfire. The one called Billy pressed a hand against his shoulder where the bullet had gone through earlier that day. His shirt was stiff with dried blood. The wound still bled when he moved. Frank held a bullwhip coiled in his left hand. He was the one who had tied the knots. He knew his work. The bindings were tight enough to hold but loose enough to keep her conscious. They wanted her awake for what came next. Tom paced back and forth between 2 pine trees, his boots crunching in the snow. He kept glancing toward the darkness beyond the firelight, toward the forest that surrounded them on all sides. Something about the wilderness made him nervous. Montana did that to men from the cities. The silence was too big, the emptiness too complete. Abigail Redwood stood with her back pressed against a lodgepole, pine arms pulled behind her around the trunk. The bark dug into her spine through the wool of her traveling coat. She was 6 feet 2 inches tall in her stockinged feet. Even tied to a tree, even bleeding and frozen, she was taller than any of the 3 men who had taken her. Billy walked closer, favoring his good shoulder. His breath came out in white clouds. "Last chance," he said. His voice was thin from blood loss. "Sign the papers. Transfer the land rights. We let you go." Abigail kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance, on a point somewhere between the fire and the black wall of forest beyond. She had learned this trick at the convent, when Sister Margaret was in one of her moods, when the strap came out and the other girls were made to watch. You picked a spot on the wall and you looked at it until your mind went somewhere else, somewhere the pain could not follow. "I don't have any land," she said. Her voice was steady. That surprised her. Frank stepped forward and let the whip uncoil. The leather tongue kissed the snow with a soft hiss. "Your husband has land," Frank said. "Ezra Thornwood. 200 acres on Copper Ridge. Best grazing in 3 counties. Abigail's eyes flicked toward him for just a second, long enough for Frank to see the confusion there. "I don't have a husband," she said. Billy laughed, though it turned into a cough halfway through. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there was blood on his palm. "You came all the way from Helena looking for one, didn't you?" Billy said. "Montana Matrimonial Agency. Mail order. Bride special. Except somebody ordered you special, didn't they? Somebody who knew exactly which ranch you'd end up at." Tom stopped pacing. He turned to look at Billy with something like fear in his eyes. "We're not supposed to tell her that," Tom said. "Doesn't matter now," Frank said. He raised the whip. "She's not walking out of these woods." That was when the first shot rang out. The sound cracked across the clearing like thunder breaking on stone. Frank's hat flew off his head and tumbled into the snow 15 feet behind him. The whip fell from his hand. All 3 men dove for cover. Abigail did not move. She could not move, but her eyes swept the tree line, searching for the source of the shot. A figure stood at the edge of the firelight, tall, broad at the shoulders, wrapped in furs so dark they seemed to drink the light. A rifle rested in the crook of his arm, still smoking. The man did not speak. He simply worked the lever action on the Winchester and chambered another round. Billy scrambled behind a fallen log, his revolver already in his hand. Frank crawled toward the fire, reaching for a shotgun propped against a saddle. Tom stood frozen like a deer that had heard the wolves but could not decide which way to run. The stranger fired again. The bullet struck the ground 6 inches in front of Tom's left boot. Snow and frozen earth exploded upward. Tom finally moved. He sprinted for the horses tied at the far edge of camp. The stranger let him run. Frank got his hands on the shotgun and swung it toward the tree line. The stranger was already moving. He stepped sideways into shadow and vanished as if he had never been there at all. Frank fired both barrels into empty air. The blast lit up the night. Buckshot shredded pine branches and sent a shower of needles falling like rain. When the echo faded, the silence that rushed back was total. Billy fired 3 shots into the darkness. His hand shook so badly the bullets went wide by yards. "Show yourself!" Billy shouted. "Come out and fight like a man!" The stranger's voice came from a different direction entirely. Low, rough as gravel under a wagon wheel. "Drop your guns. Walk away. Don't come back." Frank spun toward the voice and fired the shotgun again, forgetting he had already emptied both barrels. The hammers clicked on spent shells. He threw the gun aside and drew a revolver from his belt. The stranger shot him, not to kill. The bullet took Frank in the right thigh, high up near the hip. Frank went down screaming. The revolver tumbled into the snow. Billy fired twice more in the direction of the shot. Then his hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He fumbled for fresh cartridges, his fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The stranger stepped out of the forest. He was even taller than Abigail had thought. 6'4" at least, built lean and hard like something carved from mountain oak. His beard was black and thick, untrimmed for months, maybe years. It covered the lower half of his face like a mask. Above the beard his eyes were the color of river ice. Cold, flat, empty of mercy. He walked toward Billy with the Winchester held loose in one hand. Billy got one round into the cylinder before his nerve broke. He ran. The stranger did not chase him. He stood watching until Billy disappeared into the trees. The sound of running footsteps faded. Then there was only the crackle of the fire and Frank's ragged breathing. Frank lay on his side in the snow, both hands pressed against the hole in his leg. Blood pulsed between his fingers in steady beats. He looked up at the stranger with the wide, white eyes of a horse about to be put down. "Please," Frank said. "I'm bleeding. I need a doctor." The stranger walked past him without a word. He went to the tree where Abigail was tied and pulled a knife from his belt. The blade was 10 inches long, curved slightly like a skinning knife. He cut through the ropes with 3 quick strokes. Abigail's arms fell to her sides. She tried to catch herself against the tree, but her legs gave out. She had been standing for 6 hours. The muscles had locked. She went down hard. The stranger caught her. His hands closed around her upper arms and steadied her. She looked up into his face and for the first time in 6 years felt small. Everyone she had ever known was shorter than her. Men turned away when she walked past because they did not like looking up to meet a woman's eyes. But this man looked down. "Can you walk?" he asked. Abigail tried. Her legs were still numb from the knees down. She took one step and stumbled. The stranger caught her again. "No," she said. He nodded once. Then he bent and scooped her up, one arm behind her knees and the other across her back. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, as if 185 pounds of muscle and bone and frozen woman was no more burden than a child. Abigail had not been carried since she was 8 years old. After that she had been too big, too heavy, too much. The stranger turned toward the forest. "Wait," Frank called out. His voice was weak now, thready with blood loss. "You can't leave me here. I'll freeze to death." The stranger stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. "Probably," he said. Then he carried Abigail into the trees and left Frank bleeding in the snow. They moved through the forest in silence. The stranger's boots made almost no sound despite the weight he carried. He walked like a man who knew every stone and root and hidden patch of ice, like a man who had walked these mountains so many times he could do it blind. Abigail watched his face. It gave nothing away. The beard hid his mouth. His eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead. He breathed easy and steady, no strain, no effort. After 10 minutes they came to a small clearing. A horse stood waiting there, a big bay gelding with a white blaze down its face. The horse did not startle when they approached. It simply turned its head and regarded them with dark, patient eyes. The stranger set Abigail on her feet and steadied her until she could stand on her own. Then he took the reins and brought the horse closer. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. We've got 6 hours before we reach the cabin, maybe more in this snow." He swung up into the saddle and then reached down. Abigail took his hand. He pulled her up behind him as easily as he had lifted her off the ground. She settled onto the horse's back and wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through the furs. The stranger clicked his tongue. The horse moved forward. They rode in silence for an hour before Abigail found her voice. "Who are you?" she asked. "Ezra Thornwood." Abigail's breath caught. She leaned back slightly, though her arms stayed locked around his waist. "You're the one," she said. "The one who sent the letter to the matrimonial agency." Ezra said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I didn't send any letter. But the agency said someone named Ezra Thornwood was looking for a wife, a woman who could work, someone strong. Wasn't me." The words fell like stones into deep water. Abigail felt something cold settle in her chest, colder than the wind, colder than the snow. "Then who?" she asked. "I don't know, but somebody wanted you to come looking for me, somebody who knew about my land." "Those men," Abigail said, "Billy and Frank and Tom, they kept talking about land, about papers I was supposed to sign. They said you had 200 acres on Copper Ridge." "I do. They said it was worth something, that somebody wanted it." Ezra turned his head slightly enough that she could see his profile against the darkness. "Who hired them?" he asked. "I don't know. They never said. But they knew I was coming. They were waiting for me on the road from Helena. They knew exactly where I'd be." Ezra faced forward again. His jaw worked beneath the beard. She felt the muscles in his back tense. "Somebody set a trap," he said. "For you, or for me. Maybe both." The horse picked its way down a steep slope, hooves finding purchase on frozen stone. Abigail held tighter. The warmth of Ezra's body was the only thing keeping the cold at bay. "Why would anyone want to trap me?" she asked. "I'm nobody. I don't have anything." "You were looking for a husband." "Yes. And if you married me, you'd have legal claim to half my property." Abigail went very still. "I wasn't trying to steal anything," she said quietly. "I know. I just needed somewhere to go. The convent closed. I had no money, no family. The agency was my last option." Ezra was silent for a moment. "Tell me about the convent," he said. So she did. She told him about St. Catherine's, built high in the Montana mountains, where the air was thin and the winters lasted 9 months. She told him about arriving there when she was 16 after her third failed attempt to marry, after the scandal with Marcus Webb, after no respectable family would hire her and no church would take her in. She told him about 12 years of prayer and work and silence, about hauling stone to build a new chapel, about chopping wood until her hands bled, about being the only novice strong enough to move the oak pews when the floor needed scrubbing. She told him how the other sisters looked at her, how they whispered when she walked past, how they called her Sister Margaret's pet because Mother Superior was the only one who did not seem afraid of her size. She told him about the day Mother Superior called her into the office and said the convent was closing. The archdiocese had run out of money. The land would be sold. The sisters would be dispersed to other houses, but not Abigail. "You're too unusual," Mother Superior had said, her voice gentle but firm. "The other convents won't take you. You're too tall, too strong, too much like a man." Mother Superior had given her $20 and the address of the Montana Matrimonial Agency. She had written a letter of recommendation. She had blessed Abigail and sent her out into the world with nothing but a carpetbag and a prayer. When Abigail finished talking, Ezra was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond at all. Then he spoke. "You said 3 marriages. What happened to the other 2? Abigail closed her eyes. This part was harder. "The first was Benjamin Parker. He was 68. His family hired me to marry him because they didn't want to take care of him themselves. He had a bad heart. He died the night of our wedding, before we could consummate." She felt Ezra's breathing change slightly, but he did not interrupt. "The second was Howard Blackwood, a businessman from Denver. He was 36, rich, handsome. I thought maybe this time it would be different, but he couldn't perform his duties as a husband. He tried for 3 months. Then he blamed me. He said I was too big, that my body was wrong, unnatural." Her voice was steady now. She had told this story before to doctors and priests and judges who all nodded and made notes and agreed that yes, something must be wrong with her. "He took me to a doctor in Denver, Dr. Raymond Shaw. The doctor examined me and said I had physical impediments, that I was deformed inside, that no man could ever successfully consummate a marriage with me. Howard used that report to get an annulment. He kept everything, the house, the money. He threw me out with nothing." "And the third marriage?" Ezra asked. "Marcus Webb, a school teacher. He was kind at first, gentle, but he never touched me, not once. I thought maybe he was waiting, being respectful. Then I found out why. He was in love with another man, a clerk from the land office. He'd married me to hide what he really was. When the scandal came out, I was ruined by association. That's when I went to the convent." The horse stumbled slightly on a patch of ice. Ezra steadied it with a word and a shift of his weight. They rode on. "So you're telling me," Ezra said slowly, "that you've been married 3 times, and you're still a virgin?" Abigail's face burned despite the cold. "Yes." "And the doctor said you were deformed?" "Yes." Ezra was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was different, harder. "The doctor lied." Abigail blinked. "What?" "I've been birthing calves and foals for 20 years. I know what a healthy female body looks like. Human anatomy's not so different. If you were really deformed, you wouldn't be able to ride a horse. You'd be in constant pain. You're not." Abigail's heart was beating very fast now. "But the doctor examined me. He wrote a report." "The doctor lied," Ezra said again. "Or your husband paid him to lie. Maybe both." The words hit like a physical blow. Abigail's hands tightened on Ezra's coat. "Why would he do that?" she whispered. "Because it was easier than admitting he was the one who couldn't perform. Men like that can't stand to look weak, so they find someone else to blame." Abigail could not speak. 6 years she had carried the weight of that diagnosis. 6 years of believing she was broken, defective, unfit for the most basic function of womanhood, and it had all been a lie. She pressed her forehead against Ezra's back and tried not to cry. She had learned long ago that crying solved nothing, but the tears came anyway, hot against her frozen cheeks. Ezra did not tell her to stop. He simply kept riding steady and sure, carrying her through the darkness toward whatever waited ahead. They reached the cabin just before dawn. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by spruce and lodgepole pine. One room maybe 20 feet square. A stone chimney climbed one wall. Smoke drifted from the top, which meant the fire inside was still burning. A small barn stood 50 feet away. Abigail could hear a horse shifting in its stall. Ezra dismounted and reached up to help her down. Her legs were stiff from 6 hours of riding. She stumbled when her feet hit the ground. He caught her arm and steadied her. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so." He released her arm but stayed close as she took a few careful steps. The feeling was coming back into her feet. Pins and needles at first, then a dull ache. She flexed her fingers and felt the same burning sensation. Ezra led the horse to the barn. Abigail followed, moving slowly, testing her weight with each step. Inside the barn, it was warmer. Another horse, a mare, watched them from a stall lined with fresh straw. Ezra unsaddled the gelding and rubbed him down with practiced efficiency. He did not speak while he worked. When he finished, he turned to Abigail. "The cabin's this way." She followed him across the clearing. Snow had drifted against the door during the night. Ezra kicked it aside and pushed the door open. The cabin was small, but clean. A bed stood against the far wall, the quilt pulled tight across a straw mattress. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. A cook stove sat in one corner, its firebox glowing red through the grate. Shelves lined the walls stacked with canned goods and bags of flour and dried beans. And in the other corner, covered with a dusty canvas tarp, was something the size and shape of a cradle. Abigail looked at it. Ezra looked away. He went to the stove and stirred the coals, then added wood from a box beside it. The fire caught and flared. He filled a pot with water from a bucket and set it on to boil. "Sit," he said. Abigail sat at the table. She pulled off her gloves and held her hands toward the stove, feeling the heat slowly penetrate her frozen fingers. Ezra moved around the cabin with the easy efficiency of a man who had lived alone for a long time. He knew where everything was. He did not have to think about it. He took a tin of coffee from a shelf and measured grounds into the pot. The smell filled the cabin, rich and dark. He sliced bread and laid it on a pan to toast. He opened a jar of preserves and set it on the table with a spoon. They ate in silence. The bread was tough, a few days old, but the preserves were good. Wild strawberry. Abigail had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating. She finished 3 slices before she looked up and saw Ezra watching her. "Sorry," she said. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." "Don't apologize." He pushed the rest of the loaf toward her. She took another slice. When they finished eating, Ezra poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it and let the heat soak into her palms. "We need to talk about what happens next," Ezra said. Abigail nodded. "Those men will come back," he said. "Billy and Tom are still alive. They know where I live. And whoever hired them is still out there." "What do they want?" Abigail asked. "Your signature on a land transfer, which means they think you're my wife." "But we're not married." "No." Ezra drank his coffee. He set the cup down and looked at her across the table. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Did you come here thinking we'd get married?" Abigail met his eyes. "Yes. The letter from the agency said you were looking for a wife, someone strong, someone who could work. It said you didn't care about looks or breeding or any of the things other men care about. You just wanted a partner. And you believed that." "I had to believe something," Abigail said quietly. "I had nowhere else to go." Ezra nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard work. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "I don't know you. You don't know me. Somebody used both of us to set up whatever this is. Land fraud, probably. Maybe something worse." He looked up again. "You can leave. I'll give you money. Enough to get to Helena. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere safe." Abigail's throat tightened. "And if I stay, then we need to figure out who's behind this, and we need to do it fast before they try again." "You think they will?" "I know they will. Men who hire killers don't give up easy." Abigail looked around the cabin. It was warm, safe, more of a home than she'd had in 6 years. And Ezra Thornwood, this strange, quiet man who had appeared out of the darkness to save her life, was offering her a choice. Not demanding, not taking, offering. "I'll stay," she said. Ezra studied her face for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of running, and because I don't think you're the kind of man who'd throw me out when I'm inconvenient." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Ezra's mouth, but it was gone before Abigail could be sure. "All right," he said. "Then we're partners. You work, I work. We share food and shelter, that's all. No obligations beyond that. No marriage, not unless we both decide it's what we want." Abigail felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. "Thank you," she said. Ezra shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what winter on this mountain is like." He stood and gathered the dishes. Abigail started to help, but he waved her off. "You need sleep. Take the bed." "Where will you sleep?" "I've got blankets. I'll be fine by the fire." Abigail looked at the bed, then back at Ezra. "We could share," she said. "It's cold enough." Ezra went very still. For a moment he did not move at all. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. His voice was rough. "That wouldn't be right." "Why not? We're both adults. It's just sleeping." "Because I don't trust myself that much." The words hung in the air between them. Abigail felt her face grow hot. She looked down at her hands. "I see," she said quietly. Ezra turned away and set the dishes in a wash basin. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk more in the morning." Abigail rose and went to the bed. She lay down fully clothed and pulled the quilt over herself. It smelled like wood smoke and pine, clean but lonely, the smell of a man who had lived too long alone. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. She lay there listening to Ezra move around the cabin, washing the dishes, banking the fire, spreading blankets on the floor near the stove, finally settling down with a soft creak of old wood. The silence stretched out. Abigail rolled onto her side and looked at the canvas tarp in the corner. In the dim light from the stove she could just make out the shape beneath it, a cradle, handmade, the joints perfectly fitted. "Ezra," she said softly. "Yeah." "Who was she?" A long pause. "My wife, Sarah." "And the baby?" "Lily. She would have been 8 years old this spring." Abigail's heart clenched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Me too." Another silence. Then Ezra spoke again, his voice rough with something that might have been pain, or might have been anger, or might have been both. It was February, worst winter in 20 years, snow piled higher than the roof, wind so cold it could kill a man in minutes. Sarah went into labor 3 weeks early. Something was wrong from the start. The baby was turned the wrong way. Sarah was bleeding too much. He stopped. Abigail heard him take a shaking breath. "I rode to Helena to get the doctor. 4 hours there, 4 hours back. But by the time we returned it was too late. Sarah was gone. The baby had never taken a breath." Abigail sat up in bed. "That wasn't your fault," she said. "I should have taken her to town before the winter set in. Should have insisted she stay with the doctor's wife until the baby came. Should have been faster on that horse. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." Abigail slipped out of bed and crossed to where Ezra lay. She knelt beside him on the floor. In the firelight she could see his face, the pain etched deep in the lines around his eyes, the grief he carried like a stone in his chest. She reached out and touched his hand. "Sometimes doing everything isn't enough," she said quietly. "Sometimes terrible things happen and there's nothing we can do to stop them. That doesn't make it our fault." Ezra looked at her hand on his. He did not pull away. "You sound like you know something about that," he said. "I do. I've spent 6 years blaming myself for being too big, too much, too wrong, believing that if I'd just been different, smaller, prettier, maybe people would have wanted to keep me. But you can't change what you are. You can only decide what you do with it." Ezra turned his hand over and clasped hers. "I'm scared," he said. The words came out rough, like they hurt to say. "I'm scared that if I let myself care about someone again, I'll lose them too. I'm scared that everything I touch turns to death and dust." Abigail squeezed his hand. "I understand fear," she said. "I've lived with it my whole life. The fear of being rejected, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of never being good enough for anyone." She took a breath. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life alone than I am of being hurt again. So I'm choosing to stay, if you'll let me." Ezra's eyes searched her face in the dim light. Then slowly he brought her hand to his chest and held it there against his heart. She could feel it beating, strong, steady, alive. "Stay," he said. "Not because of any letter or any arrangement. Stay because I'm asking you to." "I will," Abigail whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling together on the floor of the cabin while the fire burned low and the first light of dawn began to paint the windows gray. Then Ezra released her hand and stood. He pulled Abigail to her feet. "We should both get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Abigail nodded and went back to the bed. This time when she closed her eyes, sleep came quickly. She did not hear Ezra cross to the window, did not see him stand there watching the forest as the sun rose, did not see the way his hand tightened on the windowsill when he spotted fresh tracks in the snow. Boot prints, 3 sets, circling the cabin. They had been watched all night, and whoever was out there was not finished yet. Abigail woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, painting a rectangle of gold across the wooden floor. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the unfamiliar sounds. Then memory returned in a rush. The forest. The men. Ezra. She sat up and saw him at the stove, his back to her. He had changed clothes. The furs were gone, replaced by wool trousers and a flannel shirt that stretched tight across his shoulders. His hair was wet. He had washed at the pump outside. He turned when he heard her move. "Morning," he said. His voice was neutral, careful, as if the conversation from last night had never happened. "Morning." Abigail swung her legs out of bed and stood. Every muscle in her body protested. 6 hours tied to a tree, followed by 6 hours on horseback, had left her stiff as old leather. She moved slowly to the table and sat. Ezra set a plate in front of her. Bacon-fried eggs, thick slices of bread toasted dark. He poured coffee into her cup and then his own. They ate in silence. When Abigail finished, she looked up to find Ezra watching her. "We need to talk about the work," he said. "All right. This ranch runs on a tight margin. I've got 30 head of cattle, 2 horses, chickens in the coop behind the barn. I do all the feeding, all the repairs, all the maintenance myself. Winter's the worst. You work from sunup to sundown just to keep everything alive." He paused. "If you're staying, I need to know you can actually do the work, not just say you can." Abigail met his eyes. "Try me." Something that might have been approval flickered across Ezra's face. He stood and went to a chest by the door. He pulled out wool trousers, a flannel shirt, a heavy coat with patches at the elbows. "These were mine from before I filled out," he said. "They should fit well enough." Abigail took the clothes behind a curtain that divided off a corner of the room. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of the dress she had worn for 2 days straight. The trousers fit better than any dress ever had. They gave her legs room to move. The shirt was loose across the chest but warm. When she emerged, Ezra handed her a pair of work boots. "Try these." They were too big by half a size, but 2 pairs of wool socks solved the problem. Abigail laced them tight and stood. She looked down at herself. Dressed like this in men's clothes, she looked like what she was. Tall, strong, built for work instead of parlors. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like you might actually survive the winter." Ezra pulled on his own coat and hat. He opened the door and cold air rushed in. "Let's see what you can do." The morning was clear and brutally cold. Abigail's breath came out in white clouds that froze in the air. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white that hurt to look at. The sun glinted off it like broken glass. Ezra led her to the barn. Inside it was warmer, though not by much. The 2 horses watched them with patient eyes. The mare nickered softly when Ezra approached. "This is Dakota," Ezra said, patting the gelding's neck. "And this is Willow." Abigail reached out slowly and let Willow sniff her hand. The mare bumped her nose against Abigail's palm. "She likes you," Ezra said. He sounded surprised. "Animals usually do. People not so much." Ezra pulled a pitchfork off the wall and handed it to her. "Mucking stalls. We do it every morning. Old hay goes in the pile behind the barn. Fresh hay goes down. Make sure it's spread even. Horses won't eat it if it's bunched up." He demonstrated working quickly and efficiently. Abigail watched, then took the pitchfork and started on the second stall. The work was familiar. She had done this at the convent. 12 years of manual labor had taught her body the rhythms of physical work. Bend, lift, turn, spread. Her muscles remembered. She finished the stall in half the time it had taken her to muck stalls at St. Catherine's. The nuns had always given her the hardest jobs because she was the only one strong enough. But here, there was no one watching, no one waiting to criticize. She could simply work. When she looked up, Ezra was staring at her. "What?" she asked. "You weren't lying about being strong." "I told you I don't lie. There's no point. The truth always comes out eventually." Ezra held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough. Come on. Cattle need feeding." They hauled hay from the barn to the pasture where the cattle stood clustered against the cold. Abigail lifted bales that weighed 80 pounds each and carried them without strain. Ezra watched her out of the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable. When the cattle were fed, they chopped wood. Ezra handed Abigail an axe and pointed to a pile of logs that needed splitting. She set the first log on the chopping block and swung. The blade bit deep. The log split clean down the middle. She worked steadily for an hour while Ezra repaired a section of fence that had come loose in the wind. By the time she finished, she had split enough wood to fill the box beside the cabin door twice over. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold. Ezra returned and surveyed the pile of split wood. He looked at Abigail, then back at the wood, then at Abigail again. "You really can work," he said. It was not a question this time. "I told you. Most women can't swing an axe like that." "I'm not most women." Ezra's mouth twitched. It might have been the start of a smile. "No," he said, "you're not." They worked through the afternoon, checking fences, breaking ice on the water trough, cleaning the chicken coop. The sun arced across the sky and began its descent toward the mountains. By the time they returned to the cabin, Abigail's muscles burned with honest fatigue. The good kind. The kind that came from useful work. Ezra built up the fire while Abigail washed at the basin. Then he took a pot of stew from the back of the stove where it had been simmering all day. The smell made Abigail's stomach clench with hunger. They ate together at the table. The stew was simple but good. Venison potatoes, carrots, onions. Abigail had 3 bowls before she realized Ezra was watching her again. "Sorry," she said. "I should leave some for tomorrow." "There's more. Eat what you need." She finished her 3rd bowl and sat back. Through the window she could see the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the snow orange and pink and gold. "It's beautiful here," she said. Ezra glanced out the window. "It can kill you if you're not careful." "I know, but it's still beautiful." They sat in silence as the light faded. Ezra lit a lamp and set it on the table. In the warm glow his face looked different, younger, less hard. Abigail gathered her courage. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you stay alone for 6 years after Sarah died? You could have remarried, found someone." Ezra's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands. "I tried. For about a year. I went to town, went to church socials, tried to talk to women. But every time I looked at someone, all I could see was Sarah. How she'd looked that last night, screaming my name, begging me to save the baby, and I couldn't." His voice broke. "After a while I stopped trying. It was easier to be alone, no one to disappoint, no one to fail." Abigail reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You didn't fail her, Ezra. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. Sometimes it isn't. That doesn't mean you stop trying." Ezra turned his hand over and clasped hers. His palm was rough with calluses, warm. "Is that what you did?" he asked. "Kept trying. Even after 3 marriages failed. What choice did I have? Give up and die? Some people would. I'm too stubborn to die." This time Ezra did smile. It transformed his face, made him look almost boyish despite the beard. "I'm starting to see that." A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside the wind picked up. Snow began to fall again, thick flakes drifting past the window. Abigail felt something settle in her chest, a feeling she had not felt in years, maybe never. Safety. The feeling lasted exactly 30 seconds. Then 3 gunshots shattered the night. Ezra was on his feet before the 3rd shot finished echoing. He crossed to the window and peered out, keeping to the side so he would not be silhouetted against the lamplight. "Get down," he said. His voice was calm but absolute. Abigail dropped to the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it, company?" Ezra moved to a cabinet beside the door and pulled out the Winchester. He worked the lever, chambering around. Then he extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the cabin. A voice called out from the darkness beyond the window. "Ezra Thornwood, we know you're in there. Send out the woman, and we'll leave you be." Abigail recognized the voice. Billy, the one Ezra had shot in the shoulder the night before. Ezra moved to the other window, the one that faced the barn. He peered out for a moment, then pulled back. "3 of them," he said quietly. "Spread out. Billy's by the woodpile. Tom's near the barn. Can't see the third one. What do? We wait. They want you alive or they would have just burned the cabin." Another voice joined Billy's. "Tom, we don't want trouble." "Thornwood, just give us the woman and the papers she needs to sign. Nobody else has to get hurt." Ezra did not answer. He kept his eyes on the darkness, the rifle ready. A third voice drifted through the night. This one Abigail did not recognize. Deeper, older. "Mr. Thornwood, let me introduce myself. My name is Victor Crane. I'm a lawyer from Denver. I represent a client who has a legitimate legal claim to certain property rights currently in your possession, specifically land rights that can only be transferred with the signature of your wife." Ezra's eyes cut to Abigail. She shook her head. "I'm not his wife," she called out. "Ah, but according to our information you traveled here specifically to marry Mr. Thornwood. Whether the ceremony has taken place yet is immaterial. Common law marriage in Montana Territory requires only cohabitation and mutual consent. You're living together. That's enough." Abigail felt ice form in her stomach. "Who sent you?" she shouted. "That's confidential, I'm afraid. But I can tell you this. The land you're currently occupying is worth a great deal more than you know. In fact, next year the Union Pacific Railroad will be building a line directly through Copper Ridge. Your 200 acres sit right in the path." Ezra went very still. "How much?" he asked. His voice carried through the cabin walls. $50,000, perhaps more at auction. My client is willing to offer you $500 in cash for a clean transfer. That's more than generous considering the alternative." "What alternative?" "Protracted legal action. Expensive, time-consuming, likely to result in you losing everything anyway. Save yourself the trouble, Mr. Thornwood. Send out the woman. Let her sign the papers. Take the money and start over somewhere else." Ezra looked at Abigail in the darkness. She could not see his face clearly, but she could feel the question in his silence. "No," she said. "I'm not signing anything." "Why not?" "It's his land. I have no claim to it." "Because whoever wants it this badly didn't send men with guns to ask nicely. There's something wrong here. Something we don't understand yet." Ezra nodded slowly. "You're right." He raised his voice. "Here's my counteroffer. Mr. Crane, you and your men get off my land in the next 60 seconds or I start shooting." Silence. Then Victor Crane's voice, colder now. "I was hoping we could resolve this civilly." "Very well. Billy, Tom, persuade them." Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls. Glass shattered as the windows blew inward. Abigail pressed herself flat against the floor hands over her head. Splinters rained down from the ceiling where shots punched through. Ezra fired back. Once. Twice. A scream from outside. One of the attackers was hit. Then silence again. Ezra reloaded quickly, his hands steady despite the chaos. He edged to the broken window and risked a glance. "Tom's down," he said. "Billy's running for the barn. Can't see Crane. Is Tom dead?" "No, but he's not getting up any time soon." Abigail's mind raced. 3 men outside, 2 now with Tom wounded. But they were trapped in the cabin. If Billy and Crane set up a crossfire, they could pin Ezra and Abigail down indefinitely. And when morning came, they would be sitting targets. "We can't stay here," Abigail said. "I know. Can we get to the barn?" "Maybe, if we move fast, but that just trades one box for another. The horses are in the barn." Ezra turned to look at her. "You want to run?" "I want to live. Don't you—" For a moment Ezra did not answer. Then he nodded. "All right. When I say go, you run for the barn. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'll cover you." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." Abigail did not believe him. She could see it in his eyes. He was planning to hold them off, buy her time to escape, sacrifice himself the way he had not been able to sacrifice for Sarah. She grabbed his arm. "We go together, or we don't go at all." Ezra stared at her. "You're not dying for me, Ezra Thornwood. I didn't survive 3 failed marriages and 12 years in a convent just to watch another man throw his life away out of misplaced guilt." Something shifted in Ezra's face. The hardness cracked. Beneath it was something raw, something that might have been hope. "Together," he said. "Together." He moved to the door and pressed his ear against it, listening. After a moment he nodded. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He yanked the door open and ran. Abigail was right behind him. They sprinted across the open ground between the cabin and the barn. 50 feet of exposed snow glowing silver in the moonlight. Billy's gun roared. Bullets kicked up snow around their feet. Ezra fired back without slowing, working the lever one-handed, his other hand grabbing Abigail's wrist to pull her along. They hit the barn door together. Ezra shouldered it open and they tumbled inside. He slammed it shut and dropped the bar across it just as something heavy thudded against the other side. Inside the barn, it was dark and close. The horses stamped nervously in their stalls. Abigail could hear Billy shouting outside. "Crane! They're in the barn! We got them trapped!" Ezra was already moving. He threw open Dakota's stall and grabbed the bridle hanging on the wall. He slipped it over the gelding's head with practiced ease. "No time for saddles," he said. "Can you ride bareback?" "I can try." "Good enough." He led Dakota out and then did the same for Willow. The mare's eyes rolled white with fear, but she held still for the bridle. Ezra helped Abigail onto Willow's back, then swung up onto Dakota. He looked at the barn's rear door, the one that opened onto the pasture behind. "When I open that door, you ride hard and fast. Head for the tree line. Don't stop until you're in cover." "Where are you going?" "I'll be right behind you. I promise." This time Abigail believed him. Ezra rode Dakota to the rear door and lifted the latch. He looked back at Abigail one last time. "Ready. Ready." He kicked the door open. They burst out into the night, horses lunging forward into a full gallop. Cold air screamed past Abigail's face. She bent low over Willow's neck, gripping with her knees, trusting the horse to find its footing in the snow. Behind them, shouts, gunfire, bullets whining through the air. Then they were in the trees, and the forest swallowed them whole. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Ezra finally slowed. They were deep in the mountains now, following a trail only he could see. The horses were lathered despite the cold, their breath coming in great white plumes. Ezra dismounted and helped Abigail down. Her legs shook when they hit the ground. She had ridden horses before, but never like that. Never at a full gallop with bullets flying. "Are you hurt?" Ezra asked. "No. I'm fine." He was not fine. Abigail could see blood on his shoulder dark against the fabric of his shirt. "You're bleeding." Ezra glanced down as if noticing for the first time. "Just a graze. I've had worse." Abigail stepped closer and pulled his coat aside. The bullet had carved a furrow across the meat of his shoulder. Not deep, but not shallow either. It would need cleaning. "We should stop. Take care of that." "We can't stop. They'll be tracking us." "Not in the dark they won't. Not in these mountains. You said it yourself, one wrong step out here can kill you." Ezra hesitated. Then he nodded. "There's a line shack about a mile from here. We can shelter there until morning." They led the horses on foot, following a barely visible path through the pines. The temperature was dropping fast. Abigail's breath froze in her lungs. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. The line shack appeared without warning, a dark shape against darker trees. It was even smaller than Ezra's cabin. One room with a dirt floor and a stone fireplace. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and that was enough. Ezra tended the horses while Abigail gathered wood from a pile stacked against the outside wall. She got a fire going in the fireplace. The flames caught and spread, pushing back the darkness. When Ezra came in, she made him sit on the floor by the fire. She found a water skin hanging on the wall and used it to clean the wound on his shoulder. He did not flinch when she poured water directly into the furrow, just watched her face in the firelight. "You've done this before," he said. "The sisters got hurt sometimes, accidents. I learned to patch them up." She tore strips from the hem of her shirt and bound the wound tight. Not perfect, but it would do until they could get proper supplies. When she finished, Ezra caught her hand. "Thank you." "You're welcome." They sat together by the fire's shoulders, touching, sharing warmth. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the world had shrunk to just the two of them and the dancing flames. "What happens now?" Abigail asked. "We can't go back to the cabin, not until we know who we're dealing with." Victor Crane said he was a lawyer from Denver. He also said his client wants the land for the railroad, which means this is about money, a lot of money. $50,000. Ezra shook his head slowly. "I bought that land for $800 6 years ago. It was worthless then. Just rock and scrub and a few decent pastures. If the railroad's coming through, it's worth 100 times what I paid." "But why go through me?" Abigail asked. "I'm not your wife. I have no legal claim." "Someone thinks you do, or someone wants people to think you do." Abigail's mind turned it over. The pieces did not fit. Not yet. "The letter from the matrimonial agency," she said slowly. "Someone sent it. Someone who knew about your land. Someone who knew the railroad was coming. They wanted me to marry you." "But why? Why not just make me an offer, or threaten me directly?" "Because if I married you, and then you died, I'd inherit the land. And a grieving widow might be easier to manipulate than a stubborn mountain man." The words hung in the air between them. Ezra's face went hard. "They were going to kill me." "After we married?" "Yes, I think so." "And then force you to sign over the land." Abigail nodded. "But we didn't marry. So now they're trying to force the issue. Make it look like we're married under common law. Get my signature that way." Ezra stood and paced to the window. He stared out into the darkness, his jaw tight. Someone planned this very carefully, months in advance. They knew about the railroad before it was public knowledge. They found you. They sent that letter. They've been moving pieces on a board we couldn't even see. "Who has that kind of reach?" Abigail asked. "Someone with money, connections, someone who can hire lawyers and gunmen, someone who can afford to wait." Abigail's breath caught. "Howard." Ezra turned. "Your second husband. It fits. He's a businessman from Denver, rich, connected. He was the one who had me examined by that doctor, the one who declared me defective. What if he kept track of me? What if he knew I'd end up desperate enough to answer a marriage advertisement? Why would he care where you ended up? Because he knows I'm easy to control. I've been told my whole life that I'm worthless, that no one wants me. If he could manipulate me into marrying you and then manipulate me into signing away your land after you died, he'd make a fortune." Ezra's hands clenched into fists. "Howard Blackwood. You know him. I know of him. He bought up half of Denver in the last 5 years, railroad contracts, mining claims. He's building an empire. On the backs of people like us." "Not anymore." Ezra crossed back to where Abigail sat and dropped to his knees in front of her. He took both her hands in his. "Listen to me. We're going to stop him. We're going to prove what he's doing. And we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone else." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. I promise." Abigail looked into his eyes. In the firelight they were almost warm, almost soft. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could let me go. Sell the land yourself. Take the money and start over somewhere else. Somewhere safe." "Because you're right. You're not worthless. and you deserve better than being used by men like Howard Blackwood." He raised one hand and touched her face. His palm was rough but gentle. "You deserve to be seen, really seen, not as too much or not enough, just as you are." Abigail's throat tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "Ezra," she whispered. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not pull away. When his lips met hers, it was soft, tentative, a question instead of a demand. Abigail answered by kissing him back. The kiss deepened. Ezra's hand slid into her hair. Abigail's fingers found the front of his shirt. The fire crackled. The wind howled. And for a moment, just a moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them and the warmth between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Because you're vulnerable. You're scared, and I'm taking advantage." Abigail pulled back far enough to look him in the eye. "I'm 28 years old, Ezra. I've been married 3 times. I know the difference between someone taking advantage and someone who actually cares. You're not taking anything I'm not giving freely. You barely know me. I know you saved my life. I know you gave me a choice instead of a demand. I know you see me as a person instead of a problem. That's more than most men have given me in my entire life." Ezra searched her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if you want to kiss me again, I won't object." A slow smile spread across Ezra's face, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed him completely. "Is that so?" "That's so." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. When his hands moved to her waist, she did not stop him. When he pulled her closer, she went willingly. They lay down together by the fire, wrapped in a single blanket, bodies pressed together for warmth. Ezra's arm circled her waist. Abigail's head rested on his shoulder. "We should sleep," Ezra murmured against her hair. "Long day tomorrow." "Ezra." "Yeah. I'm glad I came here, even with everything that's happened. I'm glad." He tightened his arm around her. "So am I." They fell asleep like that two people who had been alone too long finally finding something worth holding on to. But outside in the darkness beyond the firelight, fresh snow fell and covered their tracks. And 3 men on horseback rode through the forest following a trail that was growing colder by the minute. Morning came gray and cold. Abigail woke to find Ezra already up, standing at the window of the line shack, watching the forest with the Winchester cradled in his arms. His wounded shoulder was stiff. She could see it in the way he held himself. "Any sign of them?" she asked. "No, but they're out there." Abigail rose and joined him at the window. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in pristine white. No tracks, no movement, just the endless silence of the mountains. "We can't hide forever," she said. "No, we can't." Ezra turned to face her. In the gray light his face looked haggard. He had not slept much. "We need to go to Helena, find Father O'Brien and Dr. Hayes, get them to testify that you're not my wife, that there's no legal marriage. And then we confront Howard Blackwood in court, force him to show his hand. If we can prove he's behind this, we can stop him." Abigail touched the wound on his shoulder gently. He winced but did not pull away. "This needs proper care. It's going to get infected if we don't clean it right. It'll hold until we reach town." "Ezra." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. "All right, we'll stop at Widow Stone's place on the way. She's got medical supplies, and she owes me a favor." They saddled the horses and rode out as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks. The journey to Widow Stone's ranch took 3 hours through heavy snow. By the time they arrived, Ezra's face was pale and his hands shook on the reins. The ranch was small but well kept. A cabin larger than Ezra's, a good barn fenced pastures. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Someone was home. Ezra dismounted stiffly and helped Abigail down. They had barely reached the porch when the door opened. Widow Clara Stone stood framed in the doorway. She was perhaps 46, handsome in a severe way, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes swept over Ezra, then landed on Abigail. Her expression hardened. "Ezra Thornwood," she said. Her voice was cool. "It's been a while. Mrs. Stone, we need help." Clara's eyes flicked to the blood on Ezra's shoulder. "Looks like you need more than help. You need a doctor." "He needs his wound cleaned and bandaged," Abigail said. "We can pay." Clara's gaze shifted to her. Abigail felt the assessment in that look, the judgment. She had seen it 1,000 times before, women sizing her up and finding her wanting. "And who might you be?" "Abigail Redwood, the mail-order bride." It was not a question. Abigail lifted her chin. "Yes." Clara's mouth tightened. She stepped aside. "Come in, then, before you bleed all over my porch." The inside of the cabin was warm and clean. Clara directed Ezra to a chair by the fire and began gathering supplies. Water, clean cloth, a bottle of something that smelled like whiskey and medicine combined. Abigail helped Ezra out of his coat and shirt. The wound looked worse in good light. The edges were red and beginning to swell. Clara came over with her supplies and looked at the wound without expression. "Bullet graze. You're lucky it didn't go deeper." She glanced at Abigail. "You know how to hold a man still?" "Yes." "Good, because this is going to hurt." Clara poured the medicine directly into the wound. Ezra's whole body went rigid. His hands gripped the arms of the chair hard enough to make the wood creak. But he did not cry out. Abigail held his good shoulder, her other hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. Clara worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound and binding it with fresh bandages. When she finished, she stepped back and wiped her hands on a towel. "It'll heal clean if you keep it dry and change the dressing every day. Don't do anything stupid like getting shot again." "I'll try." Clara went to the stove and poured coffee into 3 cups. She handed them out and sat down across from Ezra and Abigail. "Now," she said, "tell me what kind of trouble you've brought to my door." Ezra told her. All of it. The fake letter from the matrimonial agency. The men who had tried to force Abigail to sign papers. The attack on the cabin. The lawyer named Victor Crane. The connection to Howard Blackwood. When he finished, Clara was quiet for a long time. She stared into her coffee as if reading the future in the dark liquid. "Howard Blackwood," she said finally. "I've heard of him. Bought up 3 ranches in this valley last year. Paid good money but made it clear he wasn't taking no for an answer. Those who refused had accidents. Fires, cattle poisoning. One man's barn collapsed and killed his son." Abigail felt cold spread through her chest. "He's been doing this to other people. He's building an empire, and he doesn't care who gets crushed along the way." Clara looked up at Ezra. "You're planning to fight him in court?" "Yes." "You'll lose. He has lawyers, money, influence. You have a bullet wound and a woman nobody in town will believe came here for anything but gold digging." The words hit like a slap. Abigail opened her mouth to respond, but Clara held up a hand. "I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying that's what people will think, and what people think matters in a courtroom." Ezra's jaw tightened. "So what do you suggest we run hide, let him take everything?" "No." Clara set down her coffee cup. "I'm saying you need allies. People who will stand up and say you're telling the truth. People the judge will listen to." "Like who?" "Like me." Both Ezra and Abigail stared at her. Clara stood and walked to the window. She looked out at her land, at the home she had built with her own hands after her husband died. "I was jealous of you," she said quietly, not looking at them. "After Sarah died, I thought maybe Ezra and I might have a chance. I brought him food, offered to help with the ranch, made it clear I was available. But he never even looked at me that way, just thanked me politely and went back to being alone." She turned to face them. "When I heard about the mail-order bride, I was angry, hurt. I thought you were replacing Sarah with some desperate woman who'd take anyone, some gold digger who saw a lonely man with land and decided to take advantage." Abigail felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not a gold digger. I know that now. I saw the way you looked at him when I was cleaning his wound. That's not greed. That's something else." Clara walked back to the table and sat down. "I'll testify for you. I'll tell the judge that Ezra never sent any letter to that agency, that someone forged his name. And I'll tell them that any woman strong enough to work a ranch like you clearly can is worth more than gold." Abigail's throat tightened. "Why would you do that?" "Because Howard Blackwood took my neighbor's son, and I don't want him taking anything else from this valley, even if it means helping a woman I was stupid enough to be jealous of." Ezra reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. "Thank you." Clara pulled her hand back, but her eyes were soft. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to win." They rode into Helena 3 days later after stopping at several more ranches to gather support. Father O'Brien agreed to testify. Dr. Hayes agreed to examine Abigail and provide a medical opinion countering the fraudulent report from Denver. 5 neighboring ranchers agreed to come to court and speak on Ezra's behalf. The town of Helena sprawled across a valley larger than Abigail expected. Buildings of brick and wood lined muddy streets. People moved between them, bundled against the cold. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a 3-story structure of red brick with white columns. They found rooms at a boarding house near the church. "Separate rooms," Ezra insisted. They were not married, and he would not compromise her reputation more than it already was. That night, lying alone in her narrow bed, Abigail stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago she had been Sister Abigail living in a convent believing she was defective and unwanted. Now she was Abigail Redwood fighting for her life and the life of a man she barely knew but was beginning to love. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like hope. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through Helena about the case. The mountain man versus the Denver businessman. The mail-order bride caught in the middle. People filled every bench. They stood along the walls. They pressed against the windows from outside. Abigail sat at a table on the left side of the room. Ezra sat beside her wearing a suit borrowed from Father O'Brien. He looked uncomfortable in it, like a wild animal forced into a cage. On the other side of the courtroom sat Victor Crane and 2 other lawyers, all in expensive suits, and behind them in the front row sat Howard Blackwood. Abigail had not seen him in 6 years. He had aged. His hair was fully gray now, though still thick. His face had gone soft with good living, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who saw people as things to be used. When his gaze found hers across the courtroom, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. Judge Nathaniel Stone entered, and everyone stood. He was older than Abigail expected, perhaps 62, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat behind the bench and surveyed the courtroom with the air of a man who had seen every kind of human foolishness and was not impressed by any of it. "Be seated," he said. His voice carried easily despite not being raised. "I understand we have a property dispute. Mr. Crane, you represent the plaintiff." Victor Crane stood smoothly. "I do, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Howard Blackwood of Denver, Colorado, seeks legal recognition of his rightful claim to property currently occupied by Mr. Ezra Thornwood." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Mr. Thornwood's common-law wife, Mrs. Abigail Redwood, is in fact still legally married to my client. Her previous marriage to Mr. Blackwood was annulled based on fraudulent medical testimony. As such, the annulment is void, the marriage remains valid, and any subsequent marriage is bigamous." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Stone rapped his gavel once. "Silence. Mr. Crane, you're claiming Mrs. Redwood is married to 2 men simultaneously." "No, Your Honor. I'm claiming her marriage to my client was never properly dissolved. Therefore, her current cohabitation with Mr. Thornwood, while it may constitute common-law marriage under Montana law, is nonetheless invalid." Judge Stone turned to Ezra. "Mr. Thornwood, do you have representation?" Ezra stood. "No, Your Honor. Can't afford one." "Can you speak for yourself?" "I can." "Then speak. What's your response to these claims?" Ezra's voice was steady, calm. "I'm not married to Abigail Redwood. Never have been. She came to my ranch 2 weeks ago because someone sent a fake letter to a matrimonial agency using my name. When she arrived, she was attacked by men hired by Mr. Blackwood. I saved her life. She's been staying with me for protection. That's all." Judge Stone looked at Abigail. "Mrs. Redwood, is this accurate?" Abigail stood. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice did not. "Yes, Your Honor. I came to Montana because I received a letter from an agency saying Mr. Thornwood was looking for a wife. But we never married. We've never even discussed marriage. I'm staying with him because I have nowhere else to go, and because men with guns are trying to kill us." Another murmur from the crowd. Judge Stone's eyes narrowed. "Men with guns. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have a bullet wound, Your Honor," Ezra said. He shrugged out of his jacket and unbuttoned his shirt enough to show the bandaged shoulder. "Fresh. From 3 nights ago when Mr. Blackwood's men attacked my cabin." Victor Crane stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Thornwood has no proof my client had anything to do with any attack. This is pure speculation designed to prejudice the court." "I have proof," said a new voice. Everyone turned. A man in a sheriff's uniform stood at the back of the courtroom. Sheriff William Grant, a bear of a man with a gray mustache. "Your Honor, 2 days ago my deputies found 3 men camped in the woods east of town. One had a bullet wound to the leg. Said his name was Frank Morrison. When we questioned him, he admitted to being hired to abduct Mrs. Redwood and force her to sign property transfer documents." Judge Stone leaned forward. "Hired by whom?" "He wouldn't say at first, but after spending a night in jail he got more talkative. Said a lawyer named Victor Crane paid him $200, half up front, half on completion." Every eye in the courtroom turned to Victor Crane. His face had gone pale. "Your Honor, I have no idea what this criminal is talking about. I've never met any Frank Morrison. I've never hired anyone to commit violence." "Then you won't mind if we bring him in to identify you," Judge Stone said. He nodded to the sheriff. Sheriff Grant opened the door, and 2 deputies brought in a man in shackles. Frank Morrison. He limped heavily on his wounded leg. When he saw Victor Crane, he pointed. "That's him. That's the lawyer who hired me." The courtroom erupted. Judge Stone pounded his gavel 5 times before order was restored. "Mr. Crane," Judge Stone said. His voice was ice. "You have about 10 seconds to explain yourself before I have you arrested." Victor Crane's composure cracked. He looked at Howard Blackwood. Howard stared back without expression. No help coming from that quarter. "Your Honor," Crane said. His voice had lost its smoothness. "I was acting on behalf of my client's interests. Mr. Blackwood has a legitimate legal claim to Mrs. Redwood based on their prior marriage. We were simply trying to expedite the process of securing that claim by hiring armed men to kidnap a woman and force her to sign documents under duress. That was not the intent." "No. What was the intent, Mr. Crane?" Silence. Judge Stone turned to Howard Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, I think you'd better take the stand." Howard stood slowly. He walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences in his life. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Judge Stone regarded him coldly. "Mr. Blackwood, explain to this court exactly what your interest is in Mr. Thornwood's land." "It's simple, Your Honor. Next year, the Union Pacific Railroad will be building a line through this region. Mr. Thornwood's land sits directly in the path. I made him a fair offer to purchase it. He refused, so I sought legal means to acquire it through Mrs. Redwood, who has a rightful claim as my legal wife." "Your annulled wife." "An annulment based on fraud, as I've explained. Dr. Raymond Shaw provided a false medical report. The annulment should never have been granted." Judge Stone picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "Dr. Samuel Hayes, would you approach the bench?" Dr. Hayes stood from the gallery and came forward. He was a solid man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. "Dr. Hayes," Judge Stone said, "you examined Mrs. Redwood 3 days ago. What were your findings?" "I found her to be in perfect health, Your Honor. No physical impediments of any kind, no deformities, No medical reason whatsoever that would prevent the consummation of a marriage. Dr. Hayes pulled out a written report and handed it to the judge. Furthermore, I took the liberty of contacting the Colorado Medical Board regarding Dr. Raymond Shaw. He's currently under investigation for providing fraudulent medical diagnoses in exchange for payment. 7 other cases have been documented. In every case, Dr. Shaw was paid to provide false reports that benefited the paying party in legal proceedings. Howard Blackwood's face had gone white. Judge Stone read the report carefully. When he looked up, his expression was granite. Mr. Blackwood, it appears you knowingly procured a fraudulent medical examination to dissolve your marriage to Mrs. Redwood. Is that correct? Howard's jaw worked. He looked at Victor Crane, at the crowd, at the door, then back at the judge. She was impossible to live with, he said. His voice had lost all its smoothness. Too tall, too masculine. No man could have performed with a woman like that. The doctor simply confirmed what was obvious. The doctor lied, Judge Stone said flatly. The doctor told the truth as I saw it. You mean he told the lie you paid him to tell? Howard's face flushed red. She was defective. Any man would agree. Look at her. She's more man than woman. Abigail stood. She did not mean to. Her body simply moved of its own accord. She stood and faced Howard Blackwood across the courtroom. I am not defective, she said. Her voice rang clear and strong. I am tall. I am strong. I do not fit into the small, pretty box you wanted me in, but that does not make me broken. She walked forward until she stood directly in front of the witness stand. You could not perform your duties as a husband. That was your failure, not mine. But instead of admitting your weakness, you paid a doctor to lie. You destroyed my reputation. You threw me out with nothing. You made me believe for 6 years that something was wrong with me, that I was unnatural, unwomanly, unworthy of love. Her voice shook now but did not break. But you were wrong. There is nothing wrong with my body. The only thing wrong was the men who tried to use it and then blamed me when they failed. She turned to face the courtroom. Every eye was on her. I have been married 3 times. The first husband died before we could consummate. The second could not perform and blamed me. The third used me to hide his true nature. For years I believed this was my fault, that if I had just been smaller, prettier, more like other women, maybe someone would have wanted me. She looked at Ezra. He was standing now, his eyes locked on hers. But then I met a man who saw me, really saw me, not as too much or too little, just as I am, and he chose me anyway. She turned back to Howard. You do not get to tell me what I am worth. You do not get to define me by your failures. I am Abigail Redwood. I am strong enough to work a ranch, brave enough to stand up to men with guns, and worthy of being loved, and you cannot take that away from me. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Then someone started clapping. It was Clara Stone. She stood in the gallery applauding. One by one, others joined her. The ranchers, Father O'Brien, Dr. Hayes, Sheriff Grant, even some of the townspeople who had come just to watch the spectacle. The sound built until it filled the courtroom like thunder. Judge Stone let it go on for a full minute before he rapped his gavel. Order, he said. But there was something that might have been approval in his eyes. He turned to Howard Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, I find your testimony to be self-serving and contradicted by the medical evidence. The annulment of your marriage to Mrs. Redwood was procured through fraud. However, given that both parties believed the annulment to be valid at the time, and given that Mrs. Redwood has not cohabited with you for 6 years, I am ruling that the marriage is dissolved by virtue of abandonment and mutual consent to separate. He picked up another paper. Furthermore, the evidence shows that Mrs. Redwood and Mr. Thornwood are not married either formally or under common law. Mistress Redwood has no legal claim to Mr. Thornwood's property. Therefore, your lawsuit seeking to acquire that property through her is dismissed with prejudice. Howard half rose from the witness stand. Your Honor, you cannot simply— Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not finished. Howard sat. Judge Stone's voice went cold. I am also referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for investigation into possible criminal charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, subordination of perjury, possibly kidnapping and attempted murder depending on what Mr. Morrison has to say under oath. He looked at Victor Crane. Mr. Crane, you are suspended from practicing law in this territory pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Bailiff, take him into custody. 2 deputies moved forward. Victor Crane did not resist as they led him away. Judge Stone looked at Howard Blackwood. You're free to go, Mr. Blackwood, for now. But I suggest you do not leave Helena until the prosecutor is finished with you. Howard stood slowly. He looked at Abigail one last time. She met his gaze without flinching. Then he turned and walked out of the courtroom. The crowd parted to let him through. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. When he was gone, Judge Stone addressed the court. This matter is concluded. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Abigail stood frozen for a moment. Then Ezra was there, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder and let herself shake. You did it, he murmured. You stood up to him. We did it, together. Father O'Brien approached them smiling. Well done, both of you, though I suspect this isn't quite over yet. Ezra looked up. What do you mean? The priest's eyes twinkled. You're not married, but you've been living together for 2 weeks. The good people of Helena have strong opinions about that sort of thing. Abigail pulled back from Ezra. We never did anything improper. I believe you, but will they? Father O'Brien gestured to the crowd filing out of the courtroom. Many were whispering and glancing back at Ezra and Abigail. Ezra's jaw tightened. So what do we do? You could get married. Today. I'm authorized to perform the ceremony. It would silence the gossips and make everything legal and proper. He looked between them. Of course, that's only if you both want to. Abigail's heart was pounding. She looked at Ezra. He looked back at her. I know this isn't how things are supposed to go, Ezra said quietly. I should court you properly, take you to dinners, bring you flowers, do all the things a man's supposed to do before he asks a woman to marry him. I don't need flowers. I know, but you deserve them anyway. He took both her hands in his. Abigail Redwood, I cannot promise you an easy life. The ranch is hard. The winters are brutal. And I'm still figuring out how to be a whole person again after 6 years of being broken. But I can promise you honesty. I can promise you respect. I can promise that I will never treat you like something to be used or discarded, and I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the woman you are. His voice shook slightly. Will you marry me? Not because we have to, not because it's practical, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Abigail's vision blurred with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed an hour later in St. Mary's Church, the same church where Father O'Brien had agreed to testify, the same church where Clara Stone came to pray every Sunday. The small chapel was full. The ranchers who had testified, Dr. Hayes, Sheriff Grant, even some of the townspeople who had watched in the courtroom. Abigail wore a simple blue dress that Clara had lent her. Ezra wore the borrowed suit. They stood before Father O'Brien and spoke their vows. I, Ezra Thornwood, take you, Abigail Redwood, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. His voice did not shake this time. Abigail spoke her vows with tears running down her face. I, Abigail Redwood, take you, Ezra Thornwood, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Father O'Brien smiled. By the power vested in me by the Church and the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ezra, you may kiss your bride. Ezra cupped Abigail's face in his hands and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she kissed him back. The small congregation erupted in applause. When they broke apart, both were smiling. They rode back to the ranch the next day. The cabin looked exactly as they had left it, though someone had nailed boards over the broken windows. A note was tacked to the door. "Fixed what I could. Congratulations." C.S. Clara Stone had been there. Ezra and Abigail spent the next 6 months rebuilding. They repaired the cabin, expanded it to 2 rooms, planted a garden behind the house, built a proper fence around the pasture, and slowly, carefully they learned each other. Ezra learned that Abigail sang Shoshone songs when she thought no one was listening, that she was afraid of thunderstorms because they reminded her of the night her mother died, that she cried when she was happy and went very quiet when she was sad. Abigail learned that Ezra talked to the horses when he thought she could not hear, that he had nightmares about Sarah and woke up shaking, that he left wildflowers on her pillow without saying a word about it. They learned how to be married, how to share space and decisions and silence, how to fight without cruelty and forgive without keeping score. And on a warm night in late July, they learned each other in a different way. Ezra was gentle, patient. He took his time learning what made her gasp and what made her sigh. When she tensed, he stopped and waited until she relaxed again. When she told him what she needed, he listened. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin warm against skin. "Did I hurt you?" Ezra asked. "No, you were perfect." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Abigail Thornwood." "I love you too." 3 months later, Abigail missed her monthly time. Then another month passed, and another. Dr. Hayes confirmed what she already knew. "You're with child, Mrs. Thornwood, about 10 weeks along. Everything looks healthy." Abigail's hand went to her stomach. There was no bump yet, but inside a new life was growing. She was terrified. She waited until that evening to tell Ezra. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "Ezra," she said quietly, "I'm pregnant." He went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "You're sure?" "Dr. Hayes confirmed it this morning." Ezra's face cycled through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: fear, joy, panic, wonder. Finally, he reached out and pulled her close. "Are you all right?" he asked. "How do you feel?" "Scared." "Me too." They sat in silence for a long moment. "I keep thinking about Sarah," Ezra said. His voice was rough. "About how it ended, and I'm terrified it's going to happen again." "It won't." "You don't know that." Abigail took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "You're right. I don't know. No one knows. But I know this. I'm strong. I'm healthy. And I have you. Sarah didn't have a husband who could be with her. But I do. We're going to face this together." Ezra's hand trembled against her stomach. "I swear I won't let anything happen to you. We'll get Dr. Hayes up here weeks before you're due. We'll have everything ready. I'll be there every second." "I know you will. I'm going to be a father." Wonder crept into his voice. "We're going to have a child." "Yes, we are." He kissed her, then soft and sweet, one hand still pressed against the place where their child grew. The months passed. Winter came and went. Abigail's belly swelled. By March she was huge, her stomach so large she could barely see her feet. Moving was difficult. Sleeping was difficult. Everything was difficult. But Ezra was there for all of it. He rubbed her aching back. He helped her in and out of bed. He brought her food when she was too tired to cook. He read to her in the evenings from the Bible and from books of poetry Clara had lent them. In mid-April, Dr. Hayes came up to the ranch with a midwife named Ruth Parker. They settled in to wait. The labor started on a clear morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom in the valley. Abigail woke to a pain low in her back, not terrible yet, but unmistakable. "Ezra," she said, "it's time." He was out of bed in seconds, pulling on his clothes with shaking hands. "I'll get Dr. Hayes." "He's in the barn, and Ezra—" He turned. "Don't panic. We're going to be fine." He nodded, though his face was white. The labor lasted 14 hours. long enough for Abigail to understand why women feared childbirth, long enough for Ezra to age 10 years waiting outside while Dr. Hayes and Ruth worked. But when the sun was setting and painting the cabin walls gold, a baby's cry split the air. Dr. Hayes opened the door smiling. "Mr. Thornwood, you have a daughter, a big, healthy girl, 9 pounds if she's an ounce." Ezra pushed past him into the room. Abigail lay in bed exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a red-faced, screaming bundle wrapped in a blanket. "She has your lungs," Abigail said. Ezra crossed to the bed and looked down at his daughter. She had stopped crying and was looking up at him with dark blue eyes. Her hair was black like his. Her face was scrunched and angry and perfect. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Do you want to hold her?" Ezra's hands shook as he took the baby. She was so small, so fragile. He held her like she might shatter. "Hello, little one," he said. His voice broke. "I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to take care of you, forever." The baby yawned and closed her eyes, already falling asleep. Abigail watched them, her heart so full it hurt. "What should we name her?" Ezra asked. Abigail had thought about this for months. There was only one name that felt right. "Lily Rose, for your daughter with Sarah, so she'll never be forgotten." Ezra's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Abigail with so much love she could barely stand it. "Lily Rose Thornwood," he said. "It's perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed, still holding his daughter. Abigail leaned against his shoulder, the three of them together. A family. Outside, the sun set and the stars came out. Inside, the future began. 30 years later, Abigail stood on the same porch where she had told Ezra she was pregnant. But now the cabin was twice the size. An addition had been built for the 5 children who had come after Lily. The ranch had grown too. 50 head of cattle now, more horses, fields of wheat and corn. Abigail was 58. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her hands were scarred from 3 decades of hard work. But she was still tall, still strong, still the woman Ezra had chosen all those years ago. Ezra came out onto the porch and stood beside her. He was 59 now. His beard was fully gray. His back was bent from years of labor, but his eyes were still the same, still warm when they looked at her. "Grandchildren are getting loud," he said. "There are 12 of them. Of course they're loud." Below them in the yard, children of all ages ran and played. Lily's 3, Samuel's 2, Sarah's 4, Patrick's 1, little Willow's 2. The youngest was only 6 months old. The oldest was 15. Lily herself stood by the barn, one hand on her very pregnant belly. Her 4th child would be born within the month. "Hard to believe it's been 30 years, Ezra said. "Seems like yesterday sometimes. Other times it feels like forever." "Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" Abigail turned to look at him. "Not 1 second." Ezra smiled, the same smile that had transformed his face 3 decades ago when she had agreed to marry him. Young Thomas, their 6-year-old grandson, came running up the porch steps. "Grandpa, tell us the story about how you and Grandma met." Ezra laughed and scooped the boy up. "Again, I just told it last week." "But I like it. Please." Ezra looked at Abigail. She nodded. They sat in the rocking chairs that Ezra had made. Thomas settled on his grandfather's lap. The other grandchildren gathered around. Even Lily and the older children came closer to listen. "All right," Ezra said, "but this time I'm telling the whole truth. No softening it." "Grandma was tied to a tree," Thomas said, "and you saved her with your gun." "That's right. She had 3 minutes to live. 3 men were going to hurt her, and I shot them." "But you didn't kill them all," Abigail added. "Just scared them off. Most of them. Frank died later from his wound, but that was his choice." "And then you got married," Thomas said. Ezra shook his head. "Not right away. First we had to prove we weren't already married. Had to fight a rich man in court who wanted to steal our land. Your grandmother stood up in front of everyone and told that man he did not get to define her worth." He looked at Abigail with pride. She was magnificent. "Was it love at first sight?" one of the girls asked. "No," Abigail said honestly. It was something better. It was love that grew from respect, from working together, from choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. "Is that why you've been married so long?" Thomas asked. "That's exactly why," Ezra said. "Love at first sight is easy. Anyone can fall. The hard part is staying, choosing the same person every morning, forgiving them when they make mistakes, being forgiven when you make yours, building something together that's bigger than either of you alone." He looked around at all the faces watching him, his children, his grandchildren, the legacy he and Abigail had built. "Your grandmother came to me with nothing, no money, no family, no home, just herself. And that was enough. More than enough. She worked beside me for 30 years. She gave me 5 children. She turned this ranch into something that will outlast both of us." "And you gave me a home," Abigail said softly. "You gave me a family. You gave me proof that I was worth loving exactly as I am." Ezra reached over and took her hand. "I love you, Abigail Thornwood, today and tomorrow and every day until the mountains crumble. I love you too." The sun set behind the mountains, painting everything gold. The children went back to playing. Lily returned to the barn to check on the horses, but Ezra and Abigail stayed on the porch, hands clasped, watching the stars come out. 2 people who had been alone for too long. 2 people who had been told they were too much or not enough. 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. A family, a home, a legacy. And in the end, that was more than enough.